Excalibur 2555 AD was released for the PlayStation in 1997. The main story of the game begins with an asteroid heading directly towards Earth, and the people gathered together to build large underground tunnels for the cities above. Unfortunately, not everybody was able to make it down into the tunnels before the asteroid plummeted towards Earth, killing millions of people. One of the largest underground cities is called Soltro, and this city is ruled by a maniac called Delvalar. Delvalar sends some of his guards, known as Kala, back into the past to steal Excalibur, and equipped with laser cannons, the Kala stole the sword with ease. Merlin, outraged by this, creates a time machine, and he sends his niece, Beth, back into the future to reclaim Excalibur. The game is composed of 13 levels that take place over a variety of locales, including a sewer, an eco area, and a prison. These levels vary in length, and some of these levels can take anywhere from 5 minutes up to 30 minutes to complete. Ultimately, the length is determined by how long it takes the player to find items, solve puzzles, and to kill all the enemies in the level. The overall design of each stage has a maze-like feel to it. Throughout the game, you'll notice that there isn't many wide open areas, and overall the actual level design is quite bland. There's lots of long corridors, some empty rooms, and you do get the impression that the developers just put in some empty rooms and some extra corridors just to lengthen the overall stage. But saying that, the claustrophobic level design is enhanced by the atmospheric music, which is absolutely fantastic, and it gives you the feeling of impending dread. Despite the lackluster level design in Excalibur, it would be the dark electronic soundtrack in the background which will stick with you after you've finished playing Excalibur. The music throughout the game reacts to the ambience within each stage, so if you come across an enemy, the soundtrack will then up a gear and then start pumping electronic techno music in the background. The combat in the game is fairly basic. The main protagonist can do 3 different attacks and a block. There's an overhead slash and a forehand and a backhand slash as well. The overhand slash is very useful and good for fighting enemies like scorpions, but it does take an extra few seconds to swing the blade, while the backhand or the forehand slash are faster but a bit weaker. Obviously there are different enemies throughout the game that can inflict varying amounts of damage and can overpower you in many ways if you're not careful. So it is recommended that you master the block and slash techniques as best as you can earlier on in the game. In certain levels throughout the game, you'll gain the ability to use magic spells. There are a few spells in the game. You've got fire, enchant, healing and armor. Armor and fire are best used for combat, although fire must be used to destroy boxes in a few levels. Magic spells cannot be used until the spell instruction is found, and then the player must read how to perform the magic spell. After reading the instructions to create the spell will appear inside the spell box in the item menu screen, and then after you've done this, the player must then find and combine the proper items to create the spell. And one issue I have with this is that even if the player knows the combination, they cannot create the spell until the spell is picked up and read. The control scheme in Excalibur 2555 AD is solid and nicely laid out, and although there are several different schemes of controls that the player can master, the controls can change depending on what mode the player is in. When you're exploring levels and you're talking to different characters throughout the game, you will find that the basic movement controls work very well, even though they do feel a little bit rigid and clunky. But I would say it would be the combat mode that might dissuade a few players from persevering with this game throughout the earlier levels. During combat, Beth, the main protagonist, will go into a stance, which will mean that she'll slowly move around the map or towards the enemies which are located in the same area. This will mean that if you're facing more than one enemy, it's very difficult to maneuver and plan your attack accordingly. And I really do feel like it is the combat mechanics which let the overall game down. Excalibur got a lot of bad press back in the day, and I really do think it was because people had drawn comparisons with Excalibur and Tomb Raider 2. Obviously, Excalibur 2555 AD looks terrible in comparison to Tomb Raider 2, but they are 2 totally different gaming experiences. The only thing that they do have in common is the fact that they use female protagonists, and that is where the similarity ends. There are no platforming sections or any spectacular set pieces in Excalibur. The game has more in common with the Sega Mega Drive release back in 1990, The Immortal. The game is by no means perfect. It has horrible voice acting.
Spare me, please. I've got information that'll help you.
The level design is overly long and a little bit bland, and the combat mechanics can be quite difficult to get to grips with at first. But the game on one hand can be very atmospheric, and on the other comically bad.
This wood is wet. It won't burn.
There will be many moments throughout the game where you'll be doing fetch quests for NPCs throughout each stage, and for the majority of that time you're running through empty corridors and vacant rooms. But it is the soundtrack that's glaring in the background, which gives this very unsettling nerve-ing feeling that there's something going to happen in the next room. And when you do encounter an enemy, the soundtrack goes into full pelt, but then the atmosphere is somewhat killed by the terrible enemy sound effects. You'll find that when you come up against a scorpion or a walking skeleton, that they have the same sound files as the human barbarians that you've been versing in the earlier stages. So when you come up against these enemies, they give off this horrible fat bloke's growl, which sounds embarrassingly bad. I really do feel like that the gaming media didn't give this game a fair review upon release. It does feel like the journalists were just taking the piss out of the game because it just wasn't Tomb Raider 2, and the fact that it didn't really have amazing graphics for the time. The PAL version of the game is quite hard to get hold of at the moment. Usually copies of the game used to go for only £5 to £10 a couple of years back, but now it seems a few more people are starting to take interest in the game and prices are starting to go back up. So if you're going on eBay and you're trying to find a copy on there, I would recommend looking elsewhere, otherwise you're going to get your eyes taken out by greedy eBay sellers. The game by all means isn't an amazing release, but on the other hand it doesn't do anything particularly bad. The storyline is a little bit silly and the voice acting is comically bad, but the soundtrack, atmosphere and the sense of adventure that you get with the game is quite satisfying. So if you enjoy this particular genre and you want to give something different a try, then I would recommend Excalibur 2555 AD. Give the game a chance, it might surprise you.